Welcome to the latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. My name is Paul Thomas, and this evening we are going to be discussing politics and education, the role of education in our political current environment. With us tonight, Merrick Moses, Whitney Brooks. Welcome, panel. Okay, we're talking about these districts where you're from and other districts. In a recent phone conversation with Monica, and we hope that she gets better soon, we discussed what appears to be an increasingly polarized demographic in our nation. That being the geographical distinction between rural and urban. Rural being bright red, urban being deep blue, and suburban weighing in as purple or pink. We see it in elections that have produced the current makeup of Congress and in the popular vote of presidential elections. How much influence do the school districts in these distinct geographical regions have on the mindset of the people living there? Marjorie Taylor Greene was from Atlanta area, but she moved into this very rural area where she became the congresswoman there. And it seems to be the case that rural is, I don't want to say anything derogatory about the people who live in rural America, but different from what we see in the more urban and suburban areas. So do you think there's a particular distinction, Whitney, in the mindsets of the school districts in these particular geographical areas?
Yeah, I would say so. Because the people who are on the boards for those school districts are people that are in that community, right? So they're gonna bring their own beliefs and values to those boards and try to, influence curriculum that way.
What do you think, Merrick, about the distinction between rural and urban and suburban as far as how these educational processes are working in those specific regions?
I'm not surprised why the rural school boards are as they are in the urban and the suburban school boards. What I am also looking at is people that have been totally disenfranchised and been made to believe that the people in the urban areas are sucking up all the resources and they're to blame for everything. And usually that does fall along racial lines. So I'm not surprised at that. What disappoints me is that it seems like people don't have two pennies to rub together to make sense of this. How people are getting keyed up on all these school board issues. Meanwhile, their pockets are being picked dry. And the people that they are electing, particularly the GOP, literally wants to cut Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, which many of those rural voters need, but yet they support them anyway. That's a sad commentary on America. They've created a constituency that is so consumed by grievance that they would literally vote for people whose policies could shorten their own lifespan. And I find that to be disgraceful.
Well,
Which is as more. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Whitney.
Sorry, I was just gonna say. White women have historically always voted against their own interests just because of the way that they've been socialized in our society, and it's that insidious that it can even target, specific demographics of other white people.
Yeah, I believe that it's, and this is something that I've just come to recently. James Carville came up with the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid," but I really think it's the culture. It's the culture that makes a determination of how people vote, because they vote against their economic interests every time they push a button for the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the middle of the civil rights era, after Brown versus Board of Education mandated desegregation in schools, One strategy that emerged was busing students to districts in order to achieve more racial balance. Historians cannot agree as to whether this effort had positive or negative effects on education. But today, most school districts remain largely segregated. According to a 2019 report, more than half American public schools, the students are in districts where more than 75% are white or 75% are non-white. Is the answer to the educational improvement more integration, more equitable funding, or something else? Merrick, we're living in segregated schools now, even though Brown v. Board of Education said that's not constitutional. So, and I know you're a believer the education system is failing across the board. So what's the answer?
I don't, well, I'll say this, that many of the Black elders that I know and love and talk to really think that integration was the death knell of Black economic prosperity and completely decimated our community. There are a good group of Black people that believe that. That being said, I think that the idea around integration was a cute idea, but it was ham-handed in its implementation. And the other thing we also need to think about is that when we talked about integration, it was about busing Black kids into white schools. How many white kids were bused into Black schools? You see what I'm saying? And I think that the idea that in order for Black children to succeed, they must be in predominantly white environments is abhorrent. That being said, I do feel like there needs to be more, how can I say, there needs to be cultural exchanges between schools. So that doesn't just mean sending Black kids to white areas. It means sending different kids of different ethnicities to different areas. And don't just put it on the kids of color, right? Because again, when you just bust kids of color, that's a white centeredness, right? Why can't we have an even cultural exchange? First of all. Second of all, I think American education overall needs to be reformed. I mean, you got a good group of students that don't even know where America is on a map. That's real, right? Regardless of color. So I think that the educational system all around needs to be overhauled and retrofitted for the 21st century. Right now, we're still working on darn near an agrarian model when we talk about summer vacation, which I loved when I was teaching, which I loved. However, let's think about it. The kids were let out of school in the summer so they could help farm. So nobody's really farming right now, except for very rural areas. So how can we make sure the kids are enriched throughout the year? Maybe 3 weeks off between semesters or something like that. But I'm not sure this idea of integration, as it has previously been acted, is the greatest way to change the landscape. I think we need to talk about what that means and what that looks like. It can't just be black and brown kids being bused into white neighborhoods. That's dead. I'm not in favor of that. But I am in favor of mutual cultural exchange and mutual exchange of students across cultural divides, if that makes sense.
Okay, let me give a little background before I get back to you, Merrick, on the particular reforms that you're referring to. But Plessy versus Ferguson was the Supreme Court ruling that came out with the separate but equal doctrine. And what that separate meant was that you could go ahead and have exclusively Black schools, exclusively white schools, but they were still equal. Well, the equality never occurred because the funding never occurred. Because in the areas where you had all these Black schools, you didn't have enough money to really have a quality education, where in the white schools you had plenty of money. But that's why Brown versus Board of Education was such an important development. And I agree with you about the busing thing. The busing thing just didn't work at all. But what particular reforms? You said we need to reform public education. besides the thing that you mentioned earlier, what particular reforms? I'm talking about the culture exchanges. Yeah, we should have culture exchanges. What other reforms?
We need to look at the school day. Does the school day really need to start at between 8 and 8:30 and then to 3? What should the school day look like? Have we is our school day fashioned around the circadian rhythms of students? No, they're not. So then we wonder why that there's poor outcomes. Also, too, in terms of school lunch, now you got Republicans saying that the kids should work for their lunch. Like, what? Though all of that, the curriculum needs to be looked at. We need to have a fair and balanced curriculum in which everyone's history is taken into account. Um, Two, the way the conditions of the schools look. I remember Mike Tyson had a documentary about his life, and he walked into his Brownsville, I think, elementary and middle school, and he looked around. He said, "I didn't realize this, but they were preparing me all this time to go to prison. Why? Because the school that he attended looked like the prison facility that he was held in as an adult." This is what I'm talking about. A lot of these, particularly when you talk about older buildings, stock in some of these cities, they look like prisons. There need to be a complete overhaul. There are schools that are not conducive to learn in. There are schools in Baltimore City you can't even drink out of the water fountain because the pipes are lead. So now people have to buy Deer Park water for their students. These are the things I'm talking about from the notes in both. There are schools in Baltimore City that don't even have heat in the winter. I found out that my first generation of mentees that I had, they didn't even have heat in their classrooms when I was working with them. And I found out when they was adult, and I was like, why didn't you tell us? They said because they thought that's the way it was supposed to be. You see what I'm saying? That when we look at the reforms that need to take place, it needs to be curriculum reform, school hour reform. It needs to be wraparound services for some of these for some of these schools. There needs to be more than a social worker. You know, you've got one social worker for 500 kids. Those things. We also need to treat mental health issues with some of these kids that we're working with that are coming from homes that are in dire need. These are things that we need to do. This is not 1980. Like we really need to come into the 21st century and create innovative school models that will serve the needs of today's kids. And that includes kids also being taught how to do a trade. They've taken a lot of the trades out of school. They need to be introduced into schools. Not everybody is college material, but we do need plumbers, and plumbers make a lot of money. This is what I'm talking about. We need to overhaul these curriculums to fit the 21st century. And we haven't done it yet.
If I could add to your list of reforms, which is a pretty good list, peer tutoring, I think, would also be something that
Absolutely.
You could really impose, like one period a day where you have these people helping each other and getting that done. Okay, Whitney, segregation. Merrick is not really all that keen on it. I'm sorry, keen on integration. So what would you see as how that has worked out since Brown v. Board of Education? And what ideas do you have as far as improving education in general?
Yeah, I mean, really, I don't really have much to add. I agree with everything Merrick said. Maybe.
Well, let me ask you this then. How about the integration, segregation, racially diverseness in your area? Has that been something that is not has occurred, not occurred, or how has that played out?
Well, I mean, Chicago is a very segregated city, extremely segregated, so that ends up getting reflected in the school demographics, whether it's a public school or private school. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that, in addition to all the things that Merrick said, just doing more to make the school environment equitable for everybody, whether it's like so in our school district, I mean, the suburb that I live in is more affluent, I would say. There's a lot of renters, but a lot of homeowners also, like single family homes that are expensive houses. But our school district provides devices for all the children. So everybody in elementary school, all those kids get iPads. And in the middle school, they get Chromebooks. I don't know about the high school because we're not there yet, but providing all of those things makes the environment more equitable. I'm not sure that we necessarily all needed iPads, but I mean, I guess we did, because they implemented that right before COVID hit, and then everybody had to e-learn from home. But
do they exercise any controls over those devices, the school district?
Yeah. I mean, there's the kids have like their school email addresses and stuff, and they can only send and receive emails from other school email addresses. Like, I can't even send an email to my own son at his school email, because they keep it, like, in the cohort or whatever, for lack of a better word. But I mean, giving out all those devices is great, but it doesn't really mean much if there's not also equitable internet access. Because, when you start handing out all those devices and stuff, then you start making them integral to the curriculum. Like, it's like built into the system that, like, the kids turn in their homework on Google Classroom or whatever, and they don't have internet access, and it's hard for them to do that. So I don't know. I mean, I think just, keeping equity in the forefront of making these educational reforms is like the biggest thing.
Yeah, whatever you're looking at, make sure that equity is a primary component of what you're looking at. And if there's no equity in that proposal, then you obviously don't have a good one.
And to Whitney's point, the president mentioned yesterday that he thought it was unfair that some people have to take their kids to a McDonald's parking lot to get Wi-Fi to complete their homework. Mm-hmm. That's what the president was talking about. She's right on time with that.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Wi-Fi is critical. You got to have it if you're going to use these devices for school.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there is a scarily high percentage of American society that is totally delusional. Most of that deluded population is ideologically aligned with the MAGA movement in all its glory. What is the biggest reason for this group's inability or unwillingness to believe facts? Is it social media, ideological stubbornness, lack of education, or something else? Please rank in order of importance the main contributors to this phenomenon. Whitney, why are so much of our society delusional? Do you know why?
Well, so I have the questions pulled up, and I was reading along here as you were saying it, and you said, is it social media, ideological stubbornness, lack of education? My answer is yes. It's all of those things.
All of those things. Okay. All right. I agree too. That's why I put them in the question.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that those three things are probably the biggest. Social media has really been, like, the rest of the internet, a double-edged sword. It's a blessing and a curse, but it's so unregulated that it really can be very detrimental to just education in general, in addition to being, you know, a really useful tool. But I I don't really have a good answer for that. I mean, I think it's just it's
Maybe a combination of the three
yeah,
in an individual person, and just that's what emerges.
yeah. And
Yeah.
also racism, because like I said, racism is the answer to all of these questions.
Right, racism. Yeah, and they had racism before they even were aware of social media, and people were before they even got educated.
Mhm.
And maybe that was baked into their ideological stubbornness. What do you think, Merrick? Social media the top of your list, or other things?
Nope. The top of my list is indoctrinating religion. We have to understand that the people that you're talking about are often primed for the pump with religious dogma that has truncated their ability to think logically and critically. Most of them were raised in religious systems in which you cannot question, you can only believe. And to believe things that there's no proof that happened. In addition to that, what comes with that is ideology that says that because we accept this person as God, everybody else is going to hell. So in their minds, they feel spiritually, religiously superior because they feel that they have found the truth. That bleeds right into school, right? Which feeds into the indoctrination because one, you're taught at home not to question. You can't question the preacher. You can't question the parents. You better not question the teacher. Two, this idea of, well, if you learn too much, you won't be any good for anything else. There's actually a religious movement here founded in America whose name I will not name, in which they say, do not send your kids to college because it will ruin their faith. When I hear that, what that's telling me is don't send your kids to college because they may find out how to read this book and start asking questions, which they do not want. Social media has amplified all of these messages tenfold, 100-fold, which has literally created a hell spawn of idiots. Again, in the indoctrination, there is no logical framework. And I'm speaking as someone who has been in Christian ministry for 18 years. There is no logical framework in certain denominations that would support the investigation of truth. Whereas you have in Judaism and Islam, you're expected to learn. You're expected to ask questions. You're supposed to ask questions. But in many Christian denominations, you cannot. And so this has left people mentally, spiritually, and physically vulnerable to propaganda. And that's what we're seeing.
That's so cool.
Remember now, you can't even question the Pope because they believe, the Romans believe, that the Pope is infallible in all manners of dogma and doctrine. So that means that if we look at the fake discovery of America when the Pope divided the world between the Portuguese and the Spanish, you mean to tell me the Pope was spoke the infallible word of God when he says you need to subjugate anybody in the areas that you find, and if they don't convert, kill them? This is what we're dealing with. And I don't think people understand just how deep the indoctrination goes. And I'm saying it as a person who has literally over the last 18 years had to rearrange my whole mind because I was indoctrinated as a child into certain Roman belief systems that was antithetical to who I was as a person of African descent. And I don't think people realize how far the rabbit hole goes when we talk about how religious indoctrination permeates the lives of many Americans such that they can't even make any logical decisions.
Can I just add onto that? That what I find really fascinating is that, like, yes, you're taught not to question your leaders, but only insofar as it furthers their own agenda. Because you know that if, you know, tomorrow the Pope came out and said that he was, like, I don't know, pro-vaccine or something, people would lose their minds and start denouncing him. And that to me is really interesting. Then they would start saying, oh, well, he's just a man. It's just one person, you know, just because
In
they're
fact,
over their own agenda.
I would say that Pope Francis is probably one of the most hated popes in the modern era. I mean, there's a whole U.S. faction and right wing fascist faction around the world that are literally trying to get rid of him. And I personally believe, one, because he was born in Latin America, even though he is of Italian heritage, that don't matter to them, right? He was just born in Latin America, and the fact that he actually said, like, gay people have worthy lives, has upset so many. And I think that it's to note that anybody that's not going along with their paradigm of violence and vitriol is out.
If I can make one comment about Francis, he's fighting upstream. He's a losing battle because that hierarchy is so structurally against him that once he's gone, they're going to go back to another John Paul or Benedict or something.
It'll be worse.
It'll be worse, yeah.
It'll be just like what happened after Obama was president.
Yeah, exactly. The reaction. Yeah, the reactionaries took over. Okay, in Heather McGhee's book, we're going to get into the college area now. Heather McGhee's recent non-fictional masterpiece, The Sum of Us, where she describes how racist policies, back to what you were saying, Whitney, earlier, with things like swimming pools and red line mortgage rejections, ended up hurting everybody. She also had a section on the federal funding of higher education. And this is what she said. After World War II, the GI Bill made college free to returning veterans. But in the Jim Crow South and in many states in the North, administrators rejected the applications of the veterans of color for what was obviously racially motivated discrimination. It took years of court cases with appeals to finally allow Black students on college campuses. During that time, lower income white families like mine were able to send their white sons and daughters like me and Bobby to college because grants and low interest loans were easily obtained back in those days. In addition to poor whites, poor Blacks also had access to these grants and low interest loans, which made them eligible for college straight out of high school. So when it became increasingly apparent to politicians in the 60s and 70s that a highly educated, diversified population was on the horizon, the grants and the low interest loans gradually disappeared, and the banks moved in with college loans with interest rates that give most graduates a degree and a six-figure debt load. Heather's conclusion is that this racially motivated policy change in funding higher education is just another example of how racism hurts everybody. Any argument about Heather's observation, or what do you think about what she discovered? Whitney, and we'll let you go first.
Nope. I think it's spot on. I mean, I have learned a lot recently, actually, about how, you know, growing up in the kind of bubble that I did, even as a non-white person, I really didn't understand how pervasive and insidious white supremacy and racism is. And I'm really, as an adult, only just now starting to understand and unpack that. Learning about how things, even down to why everybody has seasonal allergies, it all comes down to racism, and it has to do with like the types of trees that were being planted in different neighborhoods that um don't produce fruit and produce pollen instead.
Or the car exhaust that come from those neighborhoods where the highways were built over top of these neighborhoods.
Yeah, and like how highways were very purposefully constructed right through like historically black neighborhoods, non-white neighborhoods. Like just it's kind of blowing my mind actually how much I have learned recently, and how like when people say everything's racist, no, really, literally everything is racist and rooted in white supremacy. Even things that you wouldn't expect, like everybody having seasonal allergies. So no, I absolutely agree with everything she said.
Yep, it's a good book. I encourage everybody to read it. Merrick, this is the last question. What do you think about Heather's observation about higher education funding?
I love Heather McGhee. She's so on point. I actually want to get the audiobook of that because it's such a meaty read. She's exactly right about that. Just in case in point, I am a graduate of the National Treasure, Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. And Morgan, along with the three other historically black colleges and universities in Maryland, Bowie State, Coppin State, and University of Maryland Eastern Shore, actually sued the state of Maryland for discrimination based on race.
What year was
around,
that? Do you know what year
Um,
that was?
the lawsuit started in the 90s and it ended during the term of Governor Hogan.
Okay.
So
recently.
Okay. Yes. So I'll say it ended, but he did some really shady stuff with the negotiations. But I think everybody finally got their money. And so there was literally a concerted effort to to not just defund historically black colleges and universities, but actually replicate classes that originated from the black colleges, putting them into white colleges. And the white schools were saying, well, we did that because we knew that our student base wouldn't go to Morgan. And in the University of Maryland system, you cannot duplicate classes. So that's the fight. That was one of the points of the fight. So I would say that she is correct. Again, anytime you educate black and brown people, America will have a problem. America is scared of educated black and brown people. That's clear because when Barack Obama became president, folks lost their minds. So anything that will stop the rise of an educated black and brown voter bloc conglomerate, they'll do everything to stop it. But this is the thing, though. It's never going to stop. It's not. I don't care. It's not going to stop. We will educate ourselves. We will educate our children by any means necessary.
Yeah, they can wage the war, but they don't necessarily have to win the war.
No, yeah.
The way I look at it. Whitney, you wanted to say something?
Oh, I said education is elevation. Just quote Malcolm X. But yeah, I mean the idea of being scared of educated brown and black people goes all the way back to, I mean, keeping the enslaved people illiterate because knowledge is power. It really is. And yeah,
they were definitely afraid of letting the slaves learn how to read. That was taboo in the antebellum South. Okay, thank you so much, Whitney, Merrick. What a great show. We appreciate your coming in and educating us on education. So all you out there in Cyberland, thanks for listening. Bye.